guys, welcome back. This is the last video that I'm going to be posting this year, or maybe the first one for next year. Either way, I'd like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I'm almost home. Let's get inside. Let's talk about Lynskey R500. Alright, so I'll be talking to you guys from here instead. This is going to be a long one, so grab your favorite cup and let's talk titanium. I've only been riding about 1,000 miles with this bike, and normally I'd wait until I get a little bit more miles, but since I've owned my Lightspeed for about 4 years now with over 20,000 miles, I have thoughts and inputs about the R500. So in this video I'm going to talk about how the bike rides, how it handles on the descent, how it feels in terms of the geometry and stiffer frame. I'll touch a little bit on the aesthetic and weight, and lastly I'm going to give my thoughts, pros and cons, all of that good stuff. Although this is not a comparison video, I'm going to use my Lightspeed Cherahella very carefully as a reference. So how does this bike ride? Well, coming from my Lightspeed, which is an all-day Grand Fondo, quite relaxed geometry, on flatter sections, the R500 is noticeably faster. It accelerates quicker. I can hit certain speed with the R500 easier than I can on my Lightspeed. There is no deny there, which is to be expected when the frame is this aggressive. The aerodynamic, the geometry, the drop seat stays, and specifically the 6.4 top and down diamond shaped tubes, they really play a big part in terms of speed and power transfer. No, I did not have to look at the data and compare them to tell you that the R500 is faster. This is coming from the rider who has been riding both bikes back to back with the same wheel set, and the difference is pretty clear to me. Every effort that goes into the cranks, I feel that the bike absorbs it right away. The effect almost comes instantly, so the bike doesn't feel like it's delaying or there's no latency, things like that. I'm literally describing the bike's stiffness here. Also, with this NV F65 foundation, 65 millimeters deep wheel set here, the bike doesn't feel twitchy or unstable at faster or slower speed. Although I haven't pushed the bike to the limit, I feel that the bike corners great as well. We'll touch on that more after the climb. Another thing I want to touch on is that it just wants to be ridden fast. It almost feels, well, as a rider it feels better riding it faster. Hope that makes sense. It just wants to work harder. When I get to around 20 miles or so, that's when I see it starts to shine. It responds better, it reacts faster, it steers nicer. I'm not sure if that has to do with the frame stiffness, the geometry, or the way I set it up. I don't want anybody to have a wrong impression when I say that, because I still have a lot of fun riding it at slower pace. I've had a ton of fun even at moderate pace. I rode 70 miles flat with some of the greatest people I know. The average was like 17 and I felt great physically and mentally. In other words, I had a blast. I also do a weekly recovery ride, 20 miles, mellow and conversational pace. I still enjoy it, but the bike just screams for more. It's like, hey, I have a few more gears, use them. It was kind of like that. As for the comfort and ride feel, I was a little concerned on the 6.4 tubings. Sure, they account for snappier and quicker response, but I still get the same smiles in my head that I get from my Lightspeed in terms of the ride feel. If anything, I'd say my Lightspeed is a little more compliant, a little more comfortable. Now, I don't want to scare or deter anybody from considering this frame when I say that. The difference is very minimal, it's very small. So here's what I'm going to say. On the R500, I notice how fast the frame is more than how less compliant, if that makes any sense. In other words, it still has that titanium ride feel that I'm not missing out of thanks to the 3.25 rounded seat tube and possibly seat post as well. Now, if you are new to titanium frames, one of the main differences between 3.25 and 6.4 is weight to string ratio. Watch my other video where I talked a little bit more about that. I'll include the link here. How does this bike climb? Even though this frame is not meant for climbing specific, I'm going to use 2 medium climbs I did as an example as to how I felt. I am now on Glendora Mountain Road, headed to Mount Baldy, arguably one of the most beautiful climbs in California. Easily makes top 10, 15 in the US. So here's the Strava. 22 miles, 5 grams of gain elevation with 6% average, with a few recovery spots, so it's a steady grind. I've ridden here plenty of time with my light speed, which makes this a really good place and time to talk about the R500. And I'm also using the same wheel set that was on my light speed. Given its aero or aggressive geometry and stiffer tubes, I knew it was going to be a little less comfortable on the climb, but I was wrong, and I'm glad I was. I felt fine. I didn't feel my back was arching too much or my neck was tilting too high, and everything feels almost the same as if I was riding on my light speed, which feels a little bit nicer on the neck, if I'm being honest, and that's due to its upright position. Now, I talked a little bit about stiffness earlier, but I'm only a $130, not a heavy sprinter by all means. So 1, the frame is plenty of stiff for me. 2, I don't think I've used the full potential of the bike is intended. However, I do okay on the hill, so when the climb starts, that's where I see a lot of benefits, especially when I get off the saddle and put in some effort. The bike doesn't flex as much, specifically the bottom bracket doesn't flex side to side as much as I put in the power. One thing that is different and something that I need to get used to is the gearing on this bike. My smaller chainring is 3 teeth bigger than the ring on my light speed, and I can't seem to find my cadence yet. And it is noticeably hard to climb on certain sections on the R500, but overall the climb to Mount Baldy feels awesome. Which brings me to the next climb, starting in Patterson, California, riding up to the junction, aka the wall, then continuing to Mount Hamilton. Out and back is about 90 miles, 8,000 feet of gain. We're talking 7 hours on the bike here. The last climb to Mount Hamilton is called Papa Bear, which is about 8% over the course of 4.5 miles, gaining about 2,000 feet. Toward the end of that climb, it felt a little harder getting over this hill. A few things were happening here. If I was riding slower and easier, it would be fine, but like I mentioned earlier, it feels nicer to go just a little bit harder. I've had a pretty bad saddle sore a little before I got to the top, so a little bit of a fitting issue here. Also, prior to this climb, I've only been doing 1,000 to 2,000 feet for the past 2 months or so. It was a pickup game, so where we ride depends on who shows up, that kind of thing. So endurance was definitely another big factor as well. Would it be nicer to be on my light speed? Do I wish the stem was a little higher? Sure, the short answer is yes, but at the end of that ride, the stiffer frame and the lower stem were not to the point where I need to switch bike to be more comfortable when I am doing this again. However, if physically you are not very flexible, I'd definitely raise the stem or put this bike on the queue and search for more options. We'll talk more about the stem in a second, but again, the main issue here is the saddle and the endurance. Let's talk about the descent. Either people like it or don't, but let me take you back to Mount Baldy. Remember the 22 miles grinding uphill earlier? Well, now it's 22 miles going downhill, which is my least favorite part of any ride. I've only let it go to about 40 miles per hour, which was way more than I had planned after seeing a few crashes. Anyway, the bike feels stable, planted to the ground. I can feel the weight distributed to the front wheel, which is mostly a good thing because I want that extra bit of weight so it doesn't have a lot of tendency to slide when I turn. I can lean a lot more at corners, but then again, I don't want to test my skills or push my luck or anything. So it was fun. I was pretty confident when descending. The only thing that I need to get used to is the aero position. Descending in the drops after 7 minutes or so, I was a little uncomfortable because my neck was tilting higher than I wanted. So oftentimes I slow down, rotate between the hoods and the drops. Now, here's another issue. I was descending into this 8% pretty tight switchback that swings back up halfway. Now keep in mind, I was locked in the drops. My head was already tilting higher than I wanted, descending into the switchback, and just before the road goes back up around that corner, I wish I could see further of what was coming from the other direction. Now, I can switch the insert in my stem to raise it up a little bit, but I don't think I'm gonna do that. I think I'm gonna see if I can get used to the way it is, probably a few more rides, and then we'll see from there. When it comes to the aesthetic, which is a really personal thing, it's been about 5 months now and I still dig the retro look and the drop sit stays of this bike a lot, and it keeps growing on me. The only complaint or the nitpick that I have is the headset spacers could be a little bit fatter to fill up the gap so it doesn't look like a flamingo. I'm running Cane Creek 40 series headset, and if you know anything out there that fills up that spot without having to slam the stem, please let me know. The weight of this bike is 18.5 pounds, my light speed weighs 20 pounds, my hardtail weighs 28 pounds, my steel touring bike weighs 25 pounds. Let me keep this very short. There's not a moment that I wish my bikes weigh less, and I also know that this is very subjective. Alright, with that being said, this frame is leaning toward a specific rather than a general purpose. So to conclude this, I want to leave you with some pros and cons. I'm going to start with some cons. Physically, if you're not very flexible for whatever reason that might be, I wouldn't get this frame. Sure, the stem can be shortened and raised, but they can only be done so high until they don't make sense anymore. At this point, again, I would look at something toward the endurance frame. Another reason to watch out for is if you like to climb a lot. If 80% of your ride, or maybe even 70% of your ride is hitting those elevation grinding all day, if you climb 15,000 to 20,000 feet per week, I think there are better frames than the R500. Let's talk about the pros. If your rides is split 50-50 or 40-60, meaning if you climb just as much as you're riding flats, you will have a blast. If you are someone who enjoys riding faster, and numbers are very subjective here, but I find it very lively after 18 to 20 miles or more, again, you can still have a lot of fun riding it slower, but you'll have even a better time when you get it up to speed. Just know that after you pump up those tires and check the pressure, it wants to work. Anyway, I think you get the idea. If you like the racy and modern retro look, you will not be disappointed. This is one of the raciest titanium frames I have seen, and I've seen quite a few titanium frames in person. Ride quality, I've never ridden on a carbon fiber frame before, so I'm not going to tell you what I've only heard of from some of my cyclist friends who own both carbon and titanium frames. But if you have the opportunity, I encourage you to get on a Thai frame with your current wheel set or a decent carbon wheel set. I'm almost positive that you will find the difference in ride quality. Alright, I'll stop here. I know there are several more things that I didn't get to, such as the durability, maintenance, what it is like to live with titanium frames, types of finish, customizations, the differences between titanium and steel frames, differences between Lynskey and Lightspeed, customer service, etc. They will have their own videos. Some of them were recommended by the viewer, so thank you for your suggestions. Let me know what else did I miss, what else should I be talking about, and if you own titanium bike, if you own this bike specifically, what are your thoughts? I would like to know what they are. Hope that helps and educational in certain ways. Other than that, I'll talk to you guys next time. Ride safe.